Right here with another special report. With the Resident Evil 4 remake right around the corner, I wanted to take a look at what made the game so phenomenal, so transformative in the first place. And to do so, we journey back to the mid-90s. When Resident Evil launched in 1996 as a riff on B-grade horror flicks, its fixed camera angles and tank controls enhanced the experience, curtailing the player's agency and adding to the feeling of helplessness. It was survival horror in its truest sense, deliberately paced and tense, with monsters everywhere and ammo scarce. By the end, you truly felt like a survivor. Resident Evil 2 followed many of the same tropes, but it also began taking on the trappings of an action film. Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica strayed further and further from the series' roots, and by the early 2000s, director Shinji Mikami was at least receptive to change. And the disappointing sales of 2002's Resident Evil 1 Remake for GameCube was the final nail in the coffin for traditional survival horror. By then, work had already begun on the next generation Resident Evil, and the team had hit a creative rut. The first iteration of Resident Evil 4 was envisioned by designer Hideki Kamiya as a cool and stylish action film. That version eventually became Devil May Cry. After shelving another idea that would have seen Leon infected by the progenitor virus and develop powers in his left hand, the team formulated a new concept that became known as the Hookman version. Capcom showed off that version at E3 2003, and it'll go down as one of gaming's greatest what-ifs. The graphics and assets were eerily similar to what we eventually got, but it was more traditional survival horror, with slower pacing and fixed camera angles. But we'll never know how that would have played out, because the sluggish sales of the Resident Evil 1 remake put the kibosh on the Hookman version. At that point, Shinji Mikami assumed full creative control and decided to veer away from survival horror towards more of an action game, swapping the fixed camera angles for an over-the-shoulder third-person perspective and a slow burn for elaborate set pieces and a tightly woven thrill ride. And Resident Evil 4 would redefine AAA action titles. But at the time, these were some ballsy moves. For one, RE4 had almost nothing to do with the series' resident corporate punching bag umbrella, instead focusing on a parasitic outbreak in a small Spanish village. Series regular Leon Kennedy, now government agent, was sent to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, who'd been kidnapped by a mysterious cult known as Los Illuminados. Spoiler alert, the cult was responsible for the parasites, and Leon has to fight off an army of infected villagers, animals, and all manner of creatures and monsters. And it's the sheer variety of enemies and the highly imaginative boss battles, any one of which could be the final boss in other games, that really stuck with me in my initial playthrough. While one of the bosses does repeat itself, or rather double itself, for the most part, each Captain of Evil requires a wholly different strategy. Occasionally, they'll introduce a brand new game mechanic that you'll only use for that encounter. And who could forget arguably the most terrifying enemy in all of Resident Evil, the Regenerators? As soon as you hear their trademark sniffle breathing, your heart rate immediately shoots up. Everything about these shambling creatures is unsettling, from their odd gait to how they resemble a sentient gray blob, to how they can insta-kill you, but as their name implies, they regenerate parts of themselves seemingly forever unless you use a thermal scope to target the vulnerable spots. With the possible exception of the liquor, no baddie in the series triggers this much anxiety by sound alone. One of the mainstays of AAA gaming today that I think many of us take for granted is how well they're edited. But Resident Evil 4 was arguably the first game to flow as smoothly as the greatest action films. Think back to the classics of the genre. Terminator 2, Aliens, Die Hard. There's barely a wasted syllable. They flow seamlessly from set piece to set piece, from gun battle to a poignant moment before the pace picks up again. If you check your watch with any of those flicks, then you're just impossible to please, and I will die on those hills. By the same token, Resident Evil 4's set pieces are exciting, inventive, and there's a sense of escalation. Whether it's your first or 10th playthrough, you can taste the tension. And there's just enough dialogue and introspection to set up the next bit of excitement. And speaking of which, RE4 shows just how far the writing has come from this.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
But it is still a Resident Evil title, and there's still the occasional...
You may be able to prolong your life, but it's not like you can escape your inevitable death, is it?
But that's okay, because Resident Evil 4's genius lies in its visual storytelling. Like Mad Max Fury Road, RE4 is all about the set pieces and the action. You don't have time to consider the hokey dialogue. Well, not too much time, before the game forcibly drops your jaw with the next visual stunner. Incidentally, I am curious whether the Resident Evil 4 Remake rectifies the one or two aspects that don't hold up some 2 decades later, the dialogue included. But video games, like professional athletes, need to be judged in the context of their own era. And in 2005, this astonished gamers. And for the most part, it's aged like a fine wine. Thanks for joining me for another special report. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to my televisual program, and I'll see you next time. This is Jimmy Midnight signing off.